Alright guys, welcome back. What do you make of this little setup? Too dramatic? I don't know. Just trying out something different. Thought it would be fun. I wanted to sort of share some of my knowledge. Some knowledge. I'm going to give you some compositional tools, some compositional gems of wisdom to help you guys level up your street photography. Let's get into it. So when I'm out and about and shooting street, I don't really think about these things per se. I don't actively, consciously think of all these things that I am about to share with you, but it just comes over time. They just kind of come intuitively. When I look back at all my photos, I like to sort of analyze and evaluate, what worked. Why did this photo look nice to me? Why do I find this more pleasing than another one? And over time, I've sort of kind of nailed down a couple of elements that I find aesthetically pleasing to me. And I thought I'd share that with you guys because when I started out, I sort of took a lot of photos that I didn't really like, and it got me frustrated. And I feel like if you incorporate some of these or all of these into your own sort of, into your own work, then you might find something of value. It might help you elevate your own work. I do not claim to be the founder of these. I did not invent these tools. Some of these I like to lay claim to, but most of them I haven't. So the first technique is layering. In the image, so for example in this image here that I took in the park, we've got some nice layering. You got in the foreground closer to the camera, we've got this couple wearing these hats, and then in the background you got this family walking behind. And I like this layering because they sort of reflect each other and they sort of balance out the frame. It's got like a nice flow to it. So from the top of this man's hat all the way down to this little boy at the front, there's a nice, they have this nice sort of lines that sort of converge together. There's a nice bit of convergence from the top of his hat to this little boy here on the right hand side. If I were to improve this composition, I would have waited maybe a bit longer for this man to sort of block these two gentlemen here because I just find them a bit distracting. So this photo was taken with a 28mm with my Nikon L35AF. So if you're trying to create depth in your photos with a wide angle lens, you're not really going to be able to do that with like a fast aperture. You're not really going to get bokeh. So a nice way of creating depth in your photos with a wide angle lens is to create layers. So having a foreground element, a middle ground element, and a background element, and that is exactly what is happening here. You got the foreground element with this couple walking towards the left side of the frame, and then you got this family in the middle and that little boy on his scooter in front of the family, but he's in the background. Moving on, we got this image here, and this image was taken with my 135mm, and you got this nice amount of depth. You got loads of layers, and that is the beauty of using a really long lens. You can compress loads and loads of elements into one frame. So as you can see here, like the distance I'm covering in this one frame is actually vast, but the reason why it looks pleasing is because because we're layering so many things in front of each other. You got the girl on the picnic table, you got the couple to the right, having a little chat there, and then you got just there's tons and tons of elements into one frame. Let's just say you have a medium lens. Sometimes we can layer a lot of elements together, or we can just use one thing in front, just layer one element in front of another. So in this case, this picture of this gentleman that I took, I've just layered one thing in front of him, and that is the glass pane of the bus stop. It just creates a far more interesting and far more dynamic kind of image. And what's also happening here is that we've got a somewhat bit of subframing with these two, like the stickers on the glass pane. If I were to improve this image, this composition, I would have centered his face more I would have centered it better in between these two little glass stickers. I just mentioned subframing, which leads me on to the next compositional element that could level up your photography, your street photography, and that is subframing. Subframing should be self-explanatory. So you're basically creating a frame within a frame. So you have, your frame that you take with your picture, the 35mm frame, but then you'll frame your subject within another frame within that. That frame is very much up to interpretation. It can be a very obvious frame, such as this one in this case. Like in this case, we've got the bus window that quite obviously frames the subject. It's almost as if it's like a picture frame around him. it could be, you know, less defined, not as obvious, but it's still a clear case of subframing. So for example, this picture of this couple, they're being framed by the tree leaves, you know, by the leaves, and it's not as obvious, but it's, you know, it's not as obvious as, you know, the window frame of a bus window, but it is still a subframe. It's not as, the advantage of using subframes is that it quickly and obviously directs the eye towards what you want it to go to. Here's another example. Here's a nice little geometric subframe that I created, and it's just like you got the pavement on one side, you got this wall on another side, and then you got this fence, you know, in the foreground. So here we have a bit of layering. So this fence here is, you know, that's in the foreground, you got this pavement that's in the background, and then you got this wall that's in the middle ground, and the subject is in between those three layers. So we're combining two compositional elements here. We're combining two compositional tools. We've got a bit of layering and subframing. So here's just another simple example of subframing. So I'm using the frame of the bus stop to frame this old gentleman. It's just a really simple tool, but in my opinion, it can be really, really effective. Subframing doesn't have to be an exact sort of outline around your subject. So in this case here, I took this picture of the gentleman who was stepping out of a massive warehouse, and here you can see that you might have thought that the big door would have been the perfect spot to, you know, to outline him, but in fact I decided to frame him up such that he was against the dark side of this wall, because I felt that if I had lined him up on this side of the frame, he would have been washed out against that bright backdrop. I made sure that he was standing against the dark side of the wall so that he stood out. And the subframing is in fact that square of light that pours in. It's a very harsh, you know, distinct square of light, and I use that to sort of frame his feet, and then this rectangle of dark, you know, this black rectangle sort of helps subframe him here. So we've got all these compositional tools I'm telling you guys are sort of loose, are just interpretation, they're just guidelines. They don't have to, you know, it doesn't always have to be so rigid. Another really effective compositional tool that you can use to enhance your street photography is adding motion. In this case, you could be either allowing motion or freezing motion. So in this case, I am trying to freeze motion. Here we have a gardener and he is watering the flowers, and you know, one of the beauties of street photography is that you're capturing a moment in time that just wouldn't exist otherwise. By manipulating shutter speed, by manipulating, you know, aperture, and, you know, using different film stocks, we're creating a frame, capturing a scene that just doesn't exist to the human eye. So in this case, we're freezing the water droplets. Some of it are blurry, some of it is like, there is a bit of motion blur in these water droplets. And the reason why this works really nicely is because the water is slightly blurred. You've got a nice bit of motion blur on the water droplets. But as you can see, now I don't know how well it's showing, but so the fine mist on the edge of the body of water, they're in focus, they're still sharp, but everything else is sharp and still. So that nice contrast of motion blur and sort of everything else being still, you know, it just creates a very interesting thing. It's eye-catching, it's interesting to look at. This compositional tool I'm calling hitting the bullseye. I like to think that I thought of it myself. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have thought of it, but I'm proud to have come to it by myself. Basically, it's like capturing things that sort of stick out and zoning in on a subject matter that is at odds with the rest of the frame in some way. It can be conceptually or it can be visually. You can see the background is really busy. There's like plants everywhere. There's a tent there. There's colors. It's very busy. It's very, you know, very cluttered. But in the middle of the frame, you can just see his face. You know, he's got this bright ginger hair, he's got a cigarette, and to me that just sort of stood out against this whole backdrop, against the chaotic, busy backdrop. You know, the bundles of flowers there, and that's what I mean by, you know, the subject matter being at odds with the rest of the frame. Plants on shelves, there's a tent, there's a sign there, there's bundles of flowers, there's a big sign in the foreground. There's a lot going on, whereas in the middle he's very calm. He's just standing still, very calm. Generally, I find this compositional element works best if you have the bullseye, per se, in this case, this guy in the middle of the frame, but you'll see in some of the other examples that it doesn't have to be in the center of the frame every single time. So another example of this hitting the bullseye, I took this picture of this photographer. This was actually on a photo walk I did with Dan Rubin, and he was actually one of the other sort of participants. His face is very white, but everything else is very dark. So you have like, the darks, you got this black lady, you got everything's very dark, everything's black, but his face is white, and it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb against everything else. So that's what I mean by this idea of like a bullseye on a target. Because so you got this busy street scene, there's loads of people, there's tons of people in the background, there's people in the foreground, there's my shadow there. This little opening happened and I just saw his face. It just stuck out. It was just in such stark contrast to everything else in the scene in terms of just color. This bright white face in the sun just stuck out so well against everything else. I mean, does this make sense? I'm hoping this makes sense. So this is what I mean by hitting the bullseye. It's almost like you create this bullseye within this sort of imaginary dartboard. Usually the dartboard is like very messy. It's like visually there's a lot going on, there are loads of lines, little sections, but then the bullseye is just like as a very clear dot. That is what we're trying to look for. We're trying to look for that clear red dot in the middle of this busy dartboard. Here's another example. So this is the staircase coming out of a tube station. I think this one's quite obvious. Everything is grey, everything's dark brown and green. It's really black and grey. There's almost everything's almost one color, aside from this red coat. But then you have this blonde lady with a big blonde mane. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. Here is that bullseye in the middle of this, of this dartboard. These people sort of encircle her almost perfectly in this and create like a circle around her. So again, we've got this another, a somewhat subframe within this picture. And lastly, here's another hitting bullseye. So this is what I meant by it doesn't necessarily the bullseye doesn't have to be in the center of the frame. So here we've got a very, very busy scene. We've got like loads of different shelves of, hundreds and hundreds, probably like 100 over items of, food. And it's just very, very busy. Even these two adults, like the parents of this child, they sort of blend into the background because they're almost the same color as the rest of the items. Their brown hair it's almost the same color. And the bullseye in this case is this little baby. Like his face, his eyes are looking directly at the camera. The baby's is very fair skinned baby, and it just sticks out against the very muted dark colors in the rest of the image. This is what I mean by the bullseye not necessarily having to be in the center of the frame. So here's that busy dartboard, but then the bullseye is just there. What I like to do, the sort of more advanced level photos, I guess, is that you can combine these tools together, layer them up. Here we've got layering going on with the foreground. In the foreground, we've got these flowers, and then we've got in the background, we've got the trees, and then we've got in the middle ground, we've got more flowers. But our subject is sub-framed, so I've framed her up just such that the flowers are going sort of just forming like a sort of semicircle around her head. I've created like a hit the bullseye sort of composition because we've got this busy background. You've got this swirly bouquet almost. You've got flowers everywhere, trees everywhere. There's different pools of light all over the place. But then she is clearly the subject. All of this is pointing our eyes towards her because she's in focus whilst everything else is out of focus. As I said before, the bullseye doesn't have to be in the center of the frame. One of my favorite images I've taken in a very, very long time is this one. This was taken on Oxford Circus. So we've got a lot going on. So let's break this down bit by bit. In terms of layering, we've got this girl in the front, in the foreground. Then we've got this black cab coming up next, and then we've got the subject, this group of people in the middle of the pedestrian crossing, and then we've got another moving object as another layer, this red bus, and then we've also got the what do you call it? We've got this other building, this in the background, and on top of that, obviously we've got motion. I've managed to add motion here. It sort of alternates between still, blurry, still, blurry, still. And if you're wondering how I got this shot, I shot this actually handheld, and I think it was shot at maybe 1/30th of a second. I got unbelievably lucky here because I was initially just going to shoot the people in the middle. As I shot the picture, the London bus in the background came and the London cab came. Somehow, you know, just by pure fluke, the cab and the bus sort of intersected each other, went past each other at the perfect moment. So we've got motion there, and we've also got subframing / hitting the bullseye. You know, we've got the little cluster of people in the middle of the frame. They sort of act as the bullseye. The blurry cab and the blurry London bus sort of create that dartboard. It's my most liked photo on Instagram. Anyways guys, that's the video. I hope you learned something. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. There's a lot to take in there. This is completely subjective. I thought I'd share some compositional tools, help you guys elevate your own street photography. They're open for interpretation. That's all guys. Hope you enjoyed that one. Hope you enjoyed this new lighting setup. It's very dramatic, I know. So subscribe if you haven't already. This channel is growing slowly but surely, and you know, everyone who messages me on Instagram, everyone who leaves a comment, you guys are absolute legends. They motivate me to keep making stuff for you guys. So yeah, appreciate it. Follow me on Instagram at Zain Shoots Film. I post there every day, apart from on the weekends, just give myself a little break. Check out my portfolio at zainresource.com. With all that said and done, guys, keep learning, keep shooting. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.